I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I discovered your music through a friend of mine because I asked him like, what's the greatest thing you've heard in a while? And he told me to check out Partita for 8 voices. And I started listening to the song. I was blown away, couldn't believe it. And then I listened to it another time. And yeah, and I love it. And
Thank
then
you for listening.
sure. I'm curious about a lot of things, but maybe we can start with what you're working on at the moment. I'm interested in what you're checking out and also what you're dealing with, writing or playing, what you're dealing
Sure.
with now.
Um, Today I'm multitasking. I usually try to work on just one thing at a time, but I've got a few different things going. One is a kind of large oratorio-ish kind of a piece for a Baroque orchestra based in San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
and two amazing soloists whose voices I love deeply, and a choir. And a lot of the work actually for that piece is finding and creating and combining texts so that it feels musical but also coherent. And that is all I'll say about that piece. The other
Okay.
is something totally different, collaborating with a choreographer named Pam Tanowitz. And she's used my music before, but I wanted to do a project where she really designs the music and then I kind of create something based on her design. So she's been sending me paper drawings with notes and just different sort of musical ideas that are really tied to choreography. And
So sorry for interrupting, but how
sure,
musical is the information that she's giving you?
some of it is just drawings and designs and ideas of unison and line and where things will go, which is very choreographic. And other times she has said like voices, like just humming, or that the voices do something that is rhythmic and then it goes into something kind of more full and orchestral. Sometimes she'll use dance language, just like unison and trajectory.
Yeah.
And those are things that I really like latch onto, which you
Yeah.
might have heard in Partita.
Mm-hmm.
It's all like a dance piece, really. I just kind of wrote, I'm not a choreographer, so for Partita, I really just kind of wrote, I choreographed a piece that just happened to be music. I think when I was writing the movements of Partita, I can't say when I was writing Partita because it didn't really exist as a full piece until I kind of got to the end of it and realized kind of how I wanted to tie things off. At that time, I was playing for a lot of dance classes in New York, like ballet and modern dance, and watching them move and watching them make, certain choices and loving that so much and wanting to kind of design, I don't know, music that feels like dance or feels like movement, or you have a sense of foreground and background and a sense of when, suddenly all the dancers are in one spot and they move forward or they scatter. Those kinds of balance and design decisions.
It already makes me think of the second movement, the beginning. That's the first music,
Oh yeah.
actual music that comes to mind that I can now connect to dance. And then when this da 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 da, if this comes in, that gives you a sense of architecture because there's something behind.
There's something about the way that was recorded and the amount of reverb maybe that's on that part. There's a lot of reverb on the guys' voices, so it has a sense of space. But it is something where that melodic line kind of sits in a very different place than the rest of the movement.
I mean, I love the whole piece. There's so many great moments, but there's this one moment where, like,
Oh yeah.
that's my absolute favorite moment. It always gets me. It's amazing.
I think that's one of my favorites too. That particular line and those words I wrote when I was home in North Carolina looking out at the water, the Albemarle Sound, which is a place where I had like grown up and I'd seen it from childhood. And it was this sense of being unable to reach back to the past and not knowing what happens in the future, and this sense of being unable to like hold what you want to hold.
Yeah. It's a very ambiguous moment, also harmonically. Certain notes take you, I mean, the G and the C, they take you totally out of the, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can explain a couple of other stages of the process of writing this piece. You've already said that like you maybe wrote bits and parts here and there, and then it became a larger piece that is more connected.
The first part of it that I wrote was actually the last movement, Passacaglia. And that only started in the first summer when Roomful of Teeth, the ensemble that I sing with and that sings the piece, we had just formed. We were just figuring out what we were. And, I came in one day with this idea. I said, hey guys, I want to hear us go from this I got our little sound, like with talking and texting, like just this kind of feeling, and then snap up into a chord, which is really that sort of last thing that you hear. But that was the beginning of the piece. And then I, had an idea of wanting to hear a certain chord progression, but with different vowel sounds. So you hear it in the o, ah, ah, at, really hearing those really stark colors. Then the next summer I wrote Courant, which is, I guess, the third movement. And then I had this idea of wanting to still think about the artist Saul LeWitt, whose text you hear.
Detail in the pattern.
That's T.S. Eliot. Detail of the pattern is movement. But from the midpoint of the left side,
right,
halfway between, all those sort of wall drawing directions are from Saul LeWitt. So I wrote Courant the next summer, thinking about how his paintings are very, sometimes very geometrical. And if you feel like he's sort of weaving with textiles, it's almost like a textile artist. So I wanted this sense of like weaving and rhythm and pattern. Then the third summer, I knew what I wanted to do. There was some echo of Passacaglia that I wanted to make, which is Allemande, which starts actually with text, mixed with square dance calls. So it has the dance, but also this idea of words and directions and something very technical becoming the opposite of that. So with music, we write, lines and dots and these instructions that become music, which is so wild and sounds nothing like what it looks like. And Saul LeWitt was doing this with painting, and square dancers do this with calls. So the thing you say is nothing like the thing that it creates, which is the swirling mass of people. Yeah.
Right now, when you talked about the textile connection, isn't there another piece of yours where there's a woman talking?
A piece called Really Craft, where there are these interviews with women from North Carolina and Virginia in the 1970s who are quilters. And so these women who've been quilting their whole lives, and they're talking about how they make what they make, and they're talking about patterns. So it's like the continuation. I'm obsessed with that phrase, the detail of the pattern is movement, but also with this idea of what do you notice? Do you see the pattern? Is there a pattern? Does there need to be a pattern? And at one point, there's one woman who says, I don't need no pattern. I never start with the pattern. I just make it up as I go along, which is kind of how writing music is sometimes.
What do you think it means, the detail of the pattern is movement?
What do you think it means, Pablo?
I don't know. I thought about it, but I didn't really come to a conclusion. Because to me, like, a pattern is movement, and the detail, what's the detail of the pattern? Because I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
I don't know either, and that's why I love it. But it's something that it feels like just the act of thinking about the phrase sort of does the thing that the phrase is. It's like I go into the circular place of which is the detail, which is the movement, which is the pattern.
Right.
And it's something that I find kind of encourages one to look closer at something or to listen more closely. There is something there. Is there movement? Is there some pattern in there that I haven't noticed?
You also don't have to arrive at something. It's just a...
No, you don't.
Yeah.
It could be a sort of a blissful mantra that yeah. I've also like the pattern of the detail is movement and switching the words around. It's really I've never done that in performance, but yeah.
Do you sometimes change stuff in the performance?
I think a lot of things by this point are fairly set in terms of tempo. We've gotten faster over the years, and then certain times, if the atmosphere feels right, we'll, like any music, you just hold or stretch or build things slightly differently, slight different colorations. But with the speaking, everyone's a little bit different. Some people in the group always say the exact same words that they've been speaking for the last 5 years. They never change it. I have a friend who says, yeah, I just make things up all the time. Sometimes I talk about my husband. And And I think that's really great. The effect is quite similar and maybe is even more interesting. But that's the only place where it's really improvisatory. And it's not really supposed to be, but we've let it go. But there are some things in the piece that are notated with a free rhythm chant, plain chant notation. But now the rhythm is almost so ingrained in our bodies, it never changes. But the idea is that there is freedom there. It's not a set. Like the part you were talking about before, toward you, is the rhythm is not set, but we've found over time that we've sort of established this certain pattern.
You've just mentioned notation. I'm really curious about that because on your Instagram account, you sometimes share a little bit of your notated stuff, and it looks really, really interesting. I also, like my friend, he told me like there's moments where like, how do you notate this? Especially in the beginning where the speech, which is very rhythmical, becomes even more articulate pitches and then moves in and out of these two mediums in a way. How did you find solutions to write that down?
I think people are often surprised at how some parts of the score are quite traditional looking. The rhythmic speaking was very easy. It's just percussion, really. And then I really like when things go between spoken and pitched material. And that just take a little bit of trying out with the group and practice to see what the threshold is. How possible is it to kind of go back and forth as a singer between those two worlds? Some of the more detailed, sort of nuanced colorings of certain sections, maybe it's a buzzy quality or a really light, airy quality, I'll maybe just write a word in the score. Or originally I was in the same room, so I would just say, could you try this? And that's the best way. Notation is really horrible for that. And then we would just write down little reminders. And then sometimes I would make up a certain little style of note head that looked like what it felt. So the best example of that is the beginning of the second movement of Sarabam. Rather than a normal note head, it's like it just kind of like curves up. And it doesn't really say anything. It's not a standard notation. No one would know what that means, but to me, it feels right. It was just fun to play with.
It reminded me, I have a piece where we land on a chord at the end, and then me and the bassist, we kind of stick a couple of notes in that laying chord of the piano, and this is how I wrote the notes, wrote them from the side, so that it actually looks like arrows coming from the side,
That's so great.
You sometimes then you play it differently, as you would just put the notes like this, like the normal way.
I think you really do play it differently. You think about it differently, and you are part of the music differently. Yeah.
What's with those lines that kind of cross the whole page? What's that for?
The score on my Instagram?
Yeah.
Oh, that is. We do not read from that score. That was purely an art project.
Oh, okay, I see. I thought, wow.
Yeah, no, that would. I'm so sorry. That would be really amazing. That's very George Crumb. Yeah, like his scores really do look like that. Mine, that was after the fact. But I liked this idea of like what the music is doing is kind of just like falling apart, and then
seems like the notes become liquid or something, like kind of they melt into the whole song.
That's what I want to do with music. So
cool. Yeah.
But it's not very good for practically. If you don't.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's the feeling of it is like something just melting and congealing and suddenly snapping into something else. Yeah.
I figure you do write by hand though.
I jot things down by hand, but a lot of it is Sibelius, kind of straight into it. And I actually really like Sibelius because I'll change the size of the paper often. I try to use Sibelius as freely and as easily as I would with a large piece of paper, manuscript paper, but it's easier to do on the road, and then I can make changes. Sure. Yeah.
But how do you go about when you kind of invent your own little notated things then?
Oh, sometimes I'll use Adobe Illustrator. It's a cumbersome process, but when I really want to do something that has a more free-floating feel, for percussion often. I'll use some things in Sibelius, just the notes and lines, that normal stuff, export it and have a graphic and then be able to work with it in Adobe Illustrator. I love that so much, but it's, I always say that it takes 10 times longer to write freedom into the score. It's fairly easy and straightforward. It's not interesting to me to write something that tells you exactly what to do and you just do that. But like you said, like to make the sticks, like the design of it sort of feel different, it takes a lot of time, but I think is really enjoyable to do as a person in the world.
Yeah, and it really sticks out then if you show it to your musicians. If they read it, it sticks out from the other stuff that they read somewhere else.
What are you writing now?
What I'm writing?
Yeah.
I just finished recording a new album with my trio and a Brazilian guitarist, and I wrote a couple of new songs for that. So I just finished my writing process, and right now I'm listening to takes of that recording. Maybe something would come up if I would, go to the piano for that kind of purpose, but I really kind of squeezed everything out of myself for that record right now. So writing something is not on the top of my priorities right now. Yeah. But I had a few nice moments. I'm sure you go through the same thing where you need to write something, and then of course you're not inspired at all. So sometimes then I take something old and try to find new stuff in it, and kind of do kind of a rearrangement of an older piece, and that brings me to new ideas, or it kind of gets my creativity going because you work with something already. And for this thing, we added this great Brazilian guitar player, so I had to think about a few things that I want to do differently.
Yeah, it's interesting how the instrumentation can kind of change everything. Yeah,
absolutely.
It puts you in a very different mindset, and something entirely different comes out. I always feel like, my pieces for different ensembles are like completely different people sometimes. Yeah.
But listening to your stuff, it all seems very, very connected, and everything seems to be. A lot of what I've heard is either with singing or with string instruments, which seems to be a culmination of what you're about in a way. Like you sing, but you also come from playing the violin, studying the violin, and the classical background. But even when I listen to your string quartet stuff, there's a vocal quality to the melodies and to the way it's been played. I'm curious about the cutting garden, because there's this Ravel quote in there, and I'm sure there are other quotes in there too that I can't really make out yet. But maybe you can talk to me.
Important.
It kept me thinking, like, I noticed that from somewhere else. Maybe there's another quote in there, but the Ravel thing is the thing that came to mind right away, because I think it's the first motive from the
happens.
What made you do that?
I have actually been playing. I casually threw that in there, but I've been playing with that loop of Ravel for like almost a decade.
Wow, yeah.
No one knows this, but I used to play in a string quartet, and we played the Ravel quartet, and I've played it many times. And I had this recording at one point, and I was just sort of looping it, and then before I understood what samples were, how to use them in computers, I was like, I want to put a bass drum on this. So I didn't know how to do it. And I took the beginning of a Sharon Van Etten song, she's a singer, that had a very clean bass, and I just sort of clipped it out in the audio. And anyway, was just playing with this idea of looping it. Maybe one day we'll make a whole piece out of it. But for that particular movement, the cutting garden, it was about a specific part of this garden, Dumbarton Oaks, where they grow flowers just for cutting. So
isn't there a Stravinsky piece?
Yeah.
Oh,
Dumbarton Oaks. Yeah.
Must be an inspiring place, huh?
They commission a lot of things.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, no, I actually lived there for a year. They started a new musician in residence program, kind of inspired by Stravinsky. So I was sort of their trial person. And I was walking through that garden constantly, and there are places that I walked around for like an hour before going back and starting to write music. So I have a kind of deep connection to different spots. But this one place is called the Cutting Garden, and it's where they grow the flowers to be cut to be bring inside. So it's all about just what are good things to like piece together and put together in a bouquet. And so I cut up a little bit of Ravel. There's a little Mozart. There are a couple of my quartets just because I had the music for them ready to go, and a couple of other things I can't even remember. But it felt fun to kind of splice together this weird little bouquet of old music.
It becomes a new thing. What is other stuff that is inspiring you, or maybe even music that you always go back to be inspired, or to, like, if you feel uninspired, what do you go to?
I have a top secret Spotify playlist on my phone that is called Drugs.
Drugs.
And it's drugs. It's just these are like songs or pieces of music that are I don't do drugs, but these are my musical drugs.
Sure.
Things that I always go back to, and I won't share all of them, but there's a lot of early music. I think there's actually, interestingly, Bach is not on there at all, but there are certain things that will make me kind of weep instantly, and among those are Bach chorales or certain hymns. Sometimes the sound of Monteverdi or like a really well-voiced chord, whether it's strings or voices, but mostly certain chorales that something in me just falls apart. Yeah. And I know that I can count on that if I can't quite remember what I love about music. There are certain things that I always do. And then, if I'm writing something else, maybe I'll start from there. And then the fun part of writing music is actually making it fall apart and pulling it and like liquefying it, melting it. And then the joy is putting it back together and trying to imagine what that would sound like or what that would feel like. But a lot of early music, and then some Fiona Apple.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your go-to places?
Stravinsky's Mass is one.
Oh yeah.
It's like gets me every time, and I will be inspired after listening to it. I've been listening to it for almost more than a decade, and I even did a record where I specifically, I'm a jazz musician, so we improvise and write our own pieces or sometimes play standards or whatever. But I did a record where we only played classical pieces, but I kind of rearranged them and did my spin on them, and we played Agnus Dei from the Mass, and it was a really song it's a song that's really dear to my heart, and that's mostly the first piece of music that I listen to when I feel uninspired. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Wow. I'm so excited to listen to it now.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've heard it at some point, but it's not something that I know. Great.
I have a soft spot for children's choir music too. Like, I love there's another Mass by Fauré that I love. Everybody always cites the Requiem, but there's also another Mass by Fauré that I really love that is for children's choir also. That's an amazing piece. That's another one. Something about the voice, right? That really connects to our, like the inner natural being of us. Like this now I'm speaking with my voice. And it's pitches. Yeah. And I think we as instrumentalists, we all try to get as close as possible, I think.
Yeah.
How does singing or writing for voices inform your playing as a violin player?
It's always been something that I thought about as a violinist. My mom was a singer, so I remember early on in lessons, teacher telling me to try and sound like her singing, and then I, listened to a lot of recordings of favorite singers, and I didn't sing very much growing up. I was pretty shy, so now I sing much more than I play. Mm-hmm. But there's something about the quality of the sound, the way you color something is really tied to the vowels. So whether you say oh, ah, like the edges of the sound are there. I mean, even whether I'm playing modern music or Mozart, the way that you articulate the edges of the notes is so tied to speaking, or it can be. Parlando, of course, is the term. And then But the vibrato is everything. It's how you,
Right.
where it opens up. That's all of it. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's why I enjoy the most writing for strings and for voices, because it's something that I know very well, but it's also feels very, writing for voices is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, where do you write actually? Do you write at the piano, or do you write sometimes only with pen and paper, or?
I always start at some kind of keyboard instrument. I'm on the road a lot, so I write anywhere. I actually don't write very well at home unless I really have to. My desk is over there. It's really messy. But I write, in hotel rooms and planes and between rehearsals. I find that actually really kind of inspiring for a certain part of the writing process. And I'll always start at the keyboard. Either I'll find a piano in a practice room and just record myself, or I travel with a MIDI keyboard and I'll record myself in Logic. It's just kind of like a large voice memo, just straight improvising and letting myself feel whatever I need to feel, letting it be completely not trying to construct anything, just finding the harmonies that feel right, because that to me is, as are the pillars, that's how I feel music. And then once I found those and I found some of those ingredients, then I go straight into Sibelius and start working with them and cooking on the stove and moving them around and throwing them up and cutting them apart and putting them back. I'll start with harmony, but also a concept, maybe. Maybe the concept is usually it has something to do with something visual or textural. Like does it melt apart? Does it congeal? What's the first sound? What's the first feeling? And then I have no idea how I get from there to the end. I forget it entirely. It's this crazy process to write music. Usually the last couple of days, I just finished an orchestra piece a couple weeks ago, and the last 2 days of it were like manic, crazy. I cannot remember what I did, but I basically wrote most of the piece in those 2 days. I had written it kind of up until that point, but it was terrible and boring. And then did something. So I don't know. Well, that'll be performed in August. Maybe it'll be terrible.
But you don't remember what exactly happened? What made you kind of turn it around?
Make certain decisions kind of very intuitively, but I know what I need to do to engineer the thing that I want, and I have to just let myself go to the different places. And I work with Sibelius really quickly. That's really important to me, to not get stuck behind something, but to know how to realize the idea very quickly. I feel like a painter at a certain point. You're just painting and coloring and yeah. But there's also a narrative to it too. There's a feeling of pacing and timing and form that's also a part of that. I'm not very methodical, at least not at this point. Maybe later in life I'll become much more methodical, but right now it's more about trying to let the music write itself.
I'm really drawn to stuff where sometimes you can't really make out how it's made.
But you're a jazz musician, so you're improvising. I like to sort of create music that feels improvised and yet can be played by many people.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And when I think of Partita, there's moments like where you can't really predict what's coming next. So like, wow, how did we get there? So naturally, I'm drawn to stuff like that. But I don't care how it's done. It can be written or it can be improvised, whatever. I just saw a video of you playing or improvising with a dancer, and you played little synth stuff and you sang.
Oh yeah, right. For that, I was using a Helicon Voice Live as the vocoder box, and I was playing different harmonies, but using also the edges of the voice and all the cracks in it, and to feed that into the harmonies and just play with it. It was really an improvisation, but we're going to work more on that piece or on stuff together in the next couple of years. But I used that same kind of setup with, I toured with Kanye West back in 2016 on the Pablo tour, and I was using that same setup basically to...
Right, he did a tour about me, right? That was his
concept. Yes, he did! Yeah. The Pablo tour.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Let him do his thing, use my name.
Saint Pablo, actually. Yeah, there you are.
Sure, yeah, sure.
I like playing with that because it feels sort of, I can do some of the things that I like to do with Roomful of Teeth, where you have many people doing the same vowel and the same crunch, and you break it apart and put it back together. But I can do that with one instrument, and it's just fun.
Yeah, sounded very nice, and also looked great what you did with it. And you guys obviously have a nice chemistry together.
Yeah, I think so too. We were actually put together just because we sort of looked similar. And he thought, oh, that would be interesting. But we really hit it off, and her name is Vanessa Goodman. She's a really wonderful dance artist and someone I find really inspiring. I can work in a different way from, writing an orchestra piece or writing something else. So
sure, yeah. What's the rehearsal process like with Roomful of Teeth? What's the process like if you work on a new piece?
We spend a couple of weeks together every summer. That's where we try to develop new work. And often we invite composers to come in and listen to our rehearsals and listen to us work. And then they bring in music that we can kind of workshop. In my case, I was in the group, so I just sort of brought little bits every day to try out, to say, like, would this work? And if the sort of gesture or whatever the concept needed to be tweaked, we could find some version of it that would work. And then I'd go home and make it into, put it in the music and make the form of the music. But it's different with every composer. And some people like to work very separately and then bring it in. Yeah.
I'm sure you're also studying a lot of music on the side as inspiration, also for, getting further. What kind of music are you checking out in the moment? Like also actually taking apart, maybe with the score or however you study.
When I'm writing music, I can't listen to anything. It's just too much in my head. But then I'll go through deep dives of consuming something, like trying to listen to as much as possible. I know you interviewed Gabe Kahane.
Yeah.
I really like his music a lot.
Yeah.
There's so much detail and thought and beauty in it. And he's someone that I trust, and I really enjoy digging into his music. Also, we sung together. I think I would love to sing more with him. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of pop music. I grew up with basically only classical music until I was in my 20s. And now I'm just like fascinated by, I don't know, what do I love about this? What is so exciting about it? Maybe it's something in the production or the singing or the songwriting, the craft of it. So lately it's been a lot of ABBA and Kendrick Lamar.
Right.
There we go. But it sort of changes. I've been reading a lot of poetry. That's been mostly what I've been into. Yeah. How people deal with words. That's a very big concept. I've been reading a lot of poetry. Yeah.
Nice. I'm super happy you could do it. And
thank you. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you.
You do too. Thanks for doing all of these interviews. I've been holding off on watching them because I knew I had to do this one, but now that I'm free.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Now that I've done it, I can go and watch. I want to watch Gabe's a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
So great to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.